Modern humans are believed to have emerged about 300,000 years ago, yet the first known writing system was established roughly 5,500 years ago in ancient Sumer. This reveals an extensive prehistoric timeline of over 295,000 years, during which we have scant information regarding the deities that were venerated, including their names. Numerous creators exist within every culture, receiving admiration in countless forms or representations. While some deities fade away or are lost to the relentless flow of time, many others still evoke deep devotion among people in contemporary society. As the gods of prehistory remain elusive, our focus shifts to those deities recorded in the earliest writing systems, which are found in the ancient Sumerian and Egyptian civilizations. However, there exists one particular deity that predates these figures significantly and can rightly be referred to as the original god for a substantial portion of the world's population. But before we delve into the identity of this proto-god, let's take a brief look at the other contenders for the world's oldest god. It is prudent to understand that our analysis is not based on any particular religion's claim concerning the age of their respective god or gods. Indeed, most of the currently active world religions would predictably claim that their god or gods created the universe, and thus is the oldest of all of them. In contrast, this analysis is focused solely on the written records, artifacts, and etymological evolutions which attest to an actual deity that was worshipped. In the analysis of the contenders, this chart will be extremely helpful to the viewer. It delineates the time periods for various civilizations and their respective religions. As you can see, the Sumerian and Egyptian civilizations are the only two on the chart that precede the 3rd millennium BC. Thus, our analysis will not require discussion beyond these two because the remaining civilizations are relatively much younger. In essence, we must restrict our analysis to gods older than 5,000 years. With that said, we will provide a cursory analysis later in the video regarding the Abrahamic God, which is actually a newcomer in this context. But for now, let's see which gods are part of the 5,000-year-old plus club. Horus is one of the most universally important gods in the Egyptian pantheon attested from the earliest recorded period. By tradition, born at Chemis in the Nile Delta region, Horus's father was the dead Osiris. His mother was Isis. In legend, he was the first ruler of all Egypt after an 80-year struggle for supremacy with his brother and rival Seth. Horus is a form of the sun god. The alternative name Herakti translates to Horus of the horizon, and he is sometimes depicted as a sun disk mounted between falcon's wings. He is also the symbol of the god kings of Egypt. In early dynastic times, the ruler was a follower of Horus, but by 3000 BC he became Horus in life and Osiris in death. The Eye of Horus arises from the legendary incident in which Seth tore out Horus's eye, which was later restored by his mother. The symbol can represent security of kingship, perfection, and protection against the evil influence of Seth. Min is the most significant deity in the Egyptian pantheon in respect of sexual virility. In some genealogies, he is the son of Isis. In others, he represents Isis's consort with Horus as their child. Min is depicted in anthropomorphic form wearing a modius bearing 2 plumes and a hanging ribbon. He is generally drawn in profile, legs together and with his left arm raised into the angle made by his royal flail. The most obvious feature of the iconography is a strongly erect penis. Min is represented in older art by 2 serrated cones projecting horizontally from a disc. His sacred animal is probably a white bull, and he is also associated with the tall lettuce species, Lactuca sativa, the shape of which may be reminiscent of an erect phallus. By the end of the 2nd millennium, Min had become partly syncretized with Horus as a god Min-Horus. Min is also a guardian deity of mines, hence his cult centers at Kift and Akim, which were bases for gold mining expeditions. Min was celebrated as part of the coronation rites of a ruler in Egypt, thus ensuring the sexual vigor and fertility of the new pharaoh. Neith was a goddess of Lower Egypt, but soon became part of the national pantheon with a sanctuary at Memphis. According to legend, when Neith emerged from the primeval ocean to create the world, she followed the course of the Nile down toward the sea, and on reaching the delta founded the city of Say. She is also a birth goddess both of the cosmos and of other deities when she is depicted as the great celestial cow. She is the mother of Egyptian rulers. Neith is depicted in human form wearing the red crown of Lower Egypt, and in ancient times her pre-anthropomorphic symbol was a shield bearing crossed arrows. She was sometimes called upon for advice and judgment, as in the case of the 80-year battle of the gods between Seth and Horus, when she advised the sun god Ra in favor of Horus. In other legends, she becomes the consort of Seth and the mother of the crocodile god Sobek. Nut is the most important female principle of the creation force in Egyptian cosmogony. According to the Ennead genealogy of the Heliopolis priests, she is the daughter of the god Su and the goddess Tefnut. Generally, however, she is seen as the creator goddess who, with the sun god, gives birth to the other deities of the pantheon. In legend, she becomes the consort of her brother, the chthonic god Geb. Their partnership generates Isis, Osiris, Seth, and Nephthys. In her earliest appearances, Nut is a celestial cow stretching across the sky, often held aloft by the figure of the air god Su. This depiction continues into later times. In a funerary context, when the ruler dies, he is said to be enfolded by the arms of Nut and to pass within her body. The doors of the sky are open to him. Osiris is among the most significant and widely revered deities of the Egyptian pantheon. According to the genealogy drawn up by the priests at Heliopolis, he was born at Rosatau in the necropolis of Memphis. His parents were Geb and Nut, and he was the eldest of 4 siblings, including his sister and consort Isis, his adversary Seth, and younger sister Nephthys. Isis bore the god Horus, having impregnated herself with the semen of Osiris after his death. Though Osiris is most closely linked with Isis, he is also associated with Anubis, the mortuary god of embalming, and the scorpion-like mortuary goddess Serket. The Osirian legend is known from pure Egyptian textual sources and from an embellished account of the Greek writer Plutarch. The latter describes how Osiris was persuaded by Seth to step into an exactly fitting sarcophagus during a drunken party. The coffin was nailed tight and thrown into the Nile. It was washed ashore at Byblos in Lebanon, where it became encased in the trunk of a growing tree. Eventually, the trunk was cut down and incorporated as a pillar in the palace of the local ruler. After years of searching, Isis found Osiris and brought his body home. She breathed life into it and impregnated herself with Osiris's semen. She bore his son Horus. Meanwhile, Seth found the body and once more destroyed it by hacking it into 14 pieces and scattering them along the Nile Valley. Except for Osiris's penis, which Seth had thrown to a crocodile, Isis found all the pieces and buried them at the sites of various sanctuaries. She restored the penis with a replica which subsequently became a focus of the Osirian cult. The scattering of the body was allegorized with the winnowing and scattering of grain in the fields. Ptah is the patron deity of Memphis in Lower Egypt at the southerly approach to the Nile Delta. With Atum, the sun god of Heliopolis, he is the main rival claimant to seniority as a creator god in the Egyptian pantheon. His consort is the lion goddess Sekhmet, and by implication only his son is Nefertum, the god of Atum, the primeval lotus flower. Ptah is depicted in human form wearing a closely fitting robe with only his arms free. His most distinctive features are the invariable skull cap exposing only his face and ears, and the rod of dominion which he holds, consisting of a staff surmounted by the Ankh symbol of life. He is otherwise symbolized by his sacred animal, the bull. According to the genealogy laid down by the Memphis priest, Ptah upstaged Atum as the father of the gods. He generated not only Atum but the whole Heliopolis pantheon by thinking and speaking the cosmos into existence. All life and matter were generated by the heart and the tongue of Ptah. In this cosmogony, none represents the amorphous primeval matter out of which Ptah generated himself as a bisexual entity, the maleness of which is Ptah Nun and the femaleness Ptah Naunet. Ptah is occasionally known by the title Keri Beketh, meaning he who is under his tree, suggesting that he was syncretized with an older local tree god at Memphis whose symbol is the moringa tree. In addition to his role as creator god, Ptah is also the patron deity of craftsmen, and his presence is often denoted in art by dwarfish craftsmen who work at various trades including jewelry. Ptah is envisaged as molding mankind out of base materials. In Greco-Roman times, he became identified with the Greek god Hephaestus. Ra is one of several manifestations of the sun god and creator god of Egypt, emphasizing a fragmented tribal past in the pre-dynastic period. According to legend, he created himself out of the mound that emerged from the primeval ocean. In other depictions, he arose as a child from the primeval lotus blossom. He is generally depicted in the form of a falcon wearing the sun disk on its head, surrounded by the serpentine form of the cobra goddess Wadjet. Ra is also perceived as god of the underworld. He is known in some inscriptions as Ra in Osiris, Osiris in Ra, in which case he often rides in his bark as a human figure with a ram's head surmounted by a sun disk and accompanied by the cobra goddess. The notion of the Eye of Ra is a very complex one, suggesting several things including, in essence, his power and perfection. The cult of Ra took on major importance at Heliopolis from the middle of the 3rd millennium when the 5th dynasty rulers entitled themselves as the Sons of Ra. Closely linked with the underworld god Osiris, the notion took shape that the combined deity was Ra by day as the sun climbed above the eastern horizon and became Osiris, lord of the western horizon at the onset of night. Seth is a deity who generally represents hostility and violence, but who has also claimed considerable respect. His parents are Geb and Nut, and his fellow siblings include Isis, Osiris, and Nephthys, who at times is also seen as his consort. More typically, he is linked with Semitic war goddesses, including Anat and Astarte. Legend has it that he tore himself violently from his mother's womb. He is depicted in human form with the head of an animal that seems to bear faint similarity to an aardvark, with erect ears and a long curving snout. He is also depicted in wholly animal form, in which case the beast bears no real similarity to any living creature, but has a stiffly erect tail. Other animals symbolizing the god include the oryx, pig, boar, and the hippopotamus when it is a disruptive element of the river. Seth is also represented by the crocodile. Sometime during the middle of the 3rd millennium, in the 2nd dynasty, there was a break with the tradition whereby the kings of Egypt were linked with the god Horus. The falcon symbolism of Horus was replaced with that of the creature of Seth. Several Egyptian rulers followed his cult closely. Thutmosis III in the 18th dynasty, for example, titled himself the Beloved of Seth. Sekhmet is a significant deity in the Egyptian New Kingdom at Memphis. Her father is the sun god Ra, and she is the consort of Ptah. She is, by implication, the mother of the god of the primordial lotus blossom, Nefertum. In iconography, Sekhmet is generally depicted in human form, but with the head of a lioness surmounted by a sun disk. Occasionally, she is drawn with a rosette pattern over each breast. Sekhmet is, to an extent, syncretized with the goddess Mut, who is the consort of the sun god of Thebes, Amun. In the Karnak complex, large numbers of Sekhmet's statues, typically hewn in black granite and in which she holds the Ankh symbol of life, or a papyrus stem, were raised in the precinct of the Mut sanctuary. She is said to breathe fire against the enemies of the pharaoh, and like Hathor in her attempt to destroy humanity, she can be the vengeful Eye of Ra. She is sometimes linked with Hathor, who is described as the mistress of the house of Sekhmet. Thoth is the patron deity of scribes and of knowledge, including scientific, medical, and mathematical writing, and is said to have given mankind the art of hieroglyphic writing. He is important as a mediator and counselor among the gods and is the scribe of the Heliopolis Ennead pantheon. Thoth is described in some inscriptions as a son of Ra, but according to mythology he was born from the head of the god Seth. He may be depicted in human form with the head of an ibis, wholly as an ibis or as a seated baboon, sometimes with its torso covered in feathers. His attributes include a crown which consists of a crescent moon surmounted by a moon disk. Thoth is generally regarded as a benign deity. He is also scrupulously fair and is responsible not only for entering into the record the souls who pass to the afterlife, but of adjudicating in the hall of the two truths. The pyramid texts reveal a violent side of his nature by which he decapitates the adversaries of truth and wrenches out their hearts. Before we move to the Sumerian civilization, here are some honorable mentions from the ancient Egyptian deities list whose known periods of worship begin at 2700 BC to 2400 BC. In Sumerian creation mythology, An is the supreme being, and with his chthonic female principle, Ki, is the founder of the cosmos. Also, in some texts, he is identified as the son of Ansar and Kesar, the head of the older generation of gods. He is believed to have formed the basis for the calendar and is identified in some texts as the Bull of Heaven. According to legends, heaven and earth were once inseparable until An and Ki bore a son, Enlil, god of the air, who cleaved heaven and earth in two. An carried away heaven. Ki, in company with Enlil, took the earth. An is also paired with the goddess Namu, by whom he fathered Enki. An is always a remote, shadowy figure who occasionally lends a hand to tilt the balance of fate, but otherwise tends to be out of touch with the day-to-day affairs of heaven and earth. Dumuzi, as popularly understood, is a male deity who in mythical times was the tutelary god of the city of Bad Tibira between Lagos and Uruk in southern Mesopotamia. It is believed that there was also a goddess Dumuzi from Kinanir near Lagos. The two became syncretized as the single male personality who occupies a special place in the Sumerian pantheon as the consort of the goddess Inanna. He is the first dying and rising god to be historically recorded by name. His worshippers were chiefly women, but his cult was very widespread, and as late as biblical times there are references to women weeping for Tammuz. It may be argued that Dumuzi is the model on which later gods, including Adonis, are modeled. In Syriac tradition, he is the son of the mortal father Kotar. As god of water in its capacity to nourish the earth, Enki is one of the major Sumerian deities. The son of An and Namu, he is considered by some to be a late entry to the pantheon. His consort is Damkina, and his sanctuary is at Eridu. He is usually represented as a figure in typical horned headdress and tiered skirt with two streams of water springing from his shoulders or from a vase and including leaping fish. He may also hold the eagle, thus signifying clouds rising from the waters. His foot may rest on an ibex. Enki is a complex and, at times, Machiavellian character. The running of day-to-day affairs is left to him, and in the creation mythology he organized the earth and established law and order. He is also seen in a heroic light, having been one of three principal deities engaged in the primordial battle between good and evil. Enki is perceived to fill the Tigris and Euphrates with sacred sweet water. He also appoints various other minor deities to their duties in connection with the well-being of the natural world. Additionally, he is the god of artists and craftsmen. According to one legend, Enki generated the plants from his semen and inside his body until it made him ill, whereupon Ninhursag placed him in her own vagina and gave birth to his progeny. Inanna, Ninhursag, and Enlil are variously drawn at times as serious adversaries. Enlil is the son of the primordial On and Ki, the tutelary deity of Nippur, where, in his honor, the Eker sanctuary was built. He was the most important god of southern Mesopotamia during the 3rd millennium BC. His consort is Ninlil, who was impregnated by the waters of Enlil to create the moon god Nanna. He is depicted in horned headdress and tiered skirt, or by a horned crown on a pedestal. According to the Hymn to Enlil, he works alone and unaided. He is said to have made the pickaxe, caused the good day to come forth, and brought forth seed from the earth. He was invoked to bless his cities and ensure prosperity and abundance. His importance was such that the tutelary gods of other cities traveled to Nippur with offerings to Enlil. Enlil created several deities concerned with overseeing the natural world. In his more destructive aspect, he allowed the birth goddess to kill at birth and was responsible for miscarriage in cows and ewes. He was seen as manifesting himself in both benevolence and destructive violence. Because of his peculiar national status, he became downgraded in the Babylonian and Assyrian pantheons, being superseded respectively by Marduk and Assur. Ereshkigal is the consort of Nergal and queen of the underworld. She is also the mother of Ninazu. According to some texts, she was once a sky goddess who was abducted by the monstrous deity Kur. She lives in the palace of Ganzir and equates with the Greek Persephone. Arguably, Ereshkigal may be seen as a dark alter ego of the goddess Inanna and is identified in some texts as her elder sibling. Her consort is also identified as Gugulana. In legend, Ereshkigal is challenged by Inanna, but after judgment by the 7 Anunnaki, the underworld goddess renders her a corpse for 3 days until she is revived through the intervention of Enki, the god of wisdom. In Western Semitic pantheons, Ereshkigal becomes Alatu. Inanna is the paramount goddess of the Sumerian pantheon. Though not technically a mother goddess, she constitutes the first in a long line of historically recorded female deities concerned with the fertility of the natural world. Inanna is also a warrior goddess. She is the daughter of the moon god Nanna and sister of Utu and Iskur. In alternative tradition, she is the daughter of An. Her attendant is the minor goddess Ninsubur, and her champion is the mythical hero Gilgamesh. Of her many consorts, the most significant is the vegetation god Dumuzi. She is also identified as the younger sister of the underworld goddess Ereshkigal. She is the tutelary deity of the southern Mesopotamian city of Uruk, where her sanctuary is the Eanna temple. Inanna is usually depicted wearing a horned headdress and tiered skirt, with wings and with weapon cases at her shoulders. Later, in the Sargonic period, her symbol changes to a star or a rose. She may be associated with a lion or lion cub and is often depicted standing atop a mountain. She may be embodied in the sacred tree of Mesopotamia, which evolved into a stylized totem made of wood and decorated with precious stones and bands of metal. According to legend, Enki, who lives in the watery abyss or Abzu beneath the city of Eridu, was persuaded while drunk, and through Inanna's subterfuge, to endow her with more than 100 divine decrees, which she took back to Uruk and formed the basis of the Sumerian cultural constitution. Inanna is one of 3 gods involved in the primordial battle between good and evil. She is further engaged in a yearly conflict, also involving her consort Dumuzi, with Eris Kigal. She descends to the underworld to challenge Eris Kigal and finds herself stripped naked and tried before the 7 underworld judges. She is sentenced and left for dead for 3 days and nights before being restored at the behest of Enki, who creates 2 beings to secure her release and to revive her by sprinkling her with the food and water of life. The chief rain and thunder god of herdsmen, Iskur is described as the brother of the sun god Utu. In creation mythology, Iskur is given charge over the winds, the so-called silver lock of the heart of heaven, by the god Enki. According to some authors, in prehistoric times, he was perceived as a bull whose roar is the thunder. He may be depicted as a warrior riding across the skies in a chariot, dispensing raindrops and hailstones. In one text, he is identified as the twin brother of Enki. He is to be compared with Ninurta, who was primarily a god of farmers. He was also adopted by the Hittites as a storm god. Namu is identified in various texts as the goddess of the watery deeps. As a consort of On, she is the mother of Enki and the power of the riverbed to produce water. Alternatively, Namu is the progenitrix of On and Ki, the archetypal deities of heaven and earth. She also engendered other early gods, and in one poem is the mother of all mortal life. She molded clay collected by creatures called Sig in Sig Du and brought it to life, thus creating mankind. She is attended by 7 minor goddesses and may ultimately have become syncretized with Ninhursag. Nana is a major astral deity in the Sumerian pantheon, probably originating in very early pre-agricultural times. Nana is the tutelary god of Ur. He is the firstborn son of Enlil. His wife is Ningal, and he is the father of the gods Utu and Iskur and of the goddess Inanna. During the 3rd dynasty of Ur, the New Year festival was performed in his honor. He was considered to light up the night, to measure time, and to provide fertility. He is depicted as traveling in a carriage across the sky, bringing light to the darkness. Nergal is the son of Enlil and Ninlil, and the consort of the underworld goddess Eris Kigal. He is depicted as a god of war and sudden death, as well as being ruler of the underworld. He may be also seen as a plague god. His sanctuary is known as the Emislam. He is usually depicted as a bearded figure emerging from the ground and carrying a double-edged mace scimitar typically embellished with lion heads. By the Hellenic period, he is identified with the god Hercules. Ninhursag is one of 7 great deities of Sumer. Assuming her symbol to be the Omega, it has been depicted in art from circa 3000 BC. She is principally a fertility goddess, though technically any female deity could take on the role. Temple hymn sources identify her as the true and great Lady of Heaven, and kings of Sumer were nourished by Ninhursag's milk. She is typically depicted wearing horned headdress and tiered skirt, often with bow cases at her shoulders, not infrequently carrying a mace surmounted by the Omega motif or a derivation, sometimes accompanied by a lion cub on a leash. In the text, Creator of the Hoe, she completed the birth of mankind after the heads had been uncovered by Enki's hoe. Most Mesopotamian gods lived in mountains, and the name Ninhursag bears significance because, according to legend, it was changed from Ninmah by her son Ninurx to commemorate his creation of the mountains. Her name, Lady of Silence, derives from the notion that the child in the womb is susceptible to both good and bad influence. Thus, the wrong incantations may jeopardize the child's well-being. As Lady of the Diadem, according to a Babylonian investiture ritual, she placed the golden crown on the king in the Eanna temple. Ninurta is the Sumerian god of farmers and is identified with the plow. He is also the god of thunder and the hero of the Sumerian pantheon, closely linked with the confrontation battles between forces of good and evil that characterize much of Mesopotamian literature. He is one of several challengers of the malignant dragon or serpent Kur. He is said to inhabit the empty space between the earth's crust and the primeval sea beneath. He is the son of Enlil and Ninhursag. He is attributed with the creation of the mountains which he is said to have built from giant stones with which he had fought against the demon Asag. He wears the horned helmet and tiered skirt and carries a weapon which becomes personified in the text, having its own intelligence and being the chief adversary of Kur. He carries the double-edged scimitar mace embellished with lions' heads, and according to some authors is depicted in non-human form as the thunderbird, which bears the head of a lion and may represent the hailstones of the god. His sanctuary is the Epiduntila. Ninurta is perceived as a youthful warrior and probably equates with the Babylonian heroic god Marduk. His cult involved a journey to Eridu from both Nippur and Girsu. He may be compared with Iskar, who was worshipped primarily by herdsmen as a storm god. Utu is the power of sunlight and, in a social context, of justice and the implementation of law. He is the son of the moon god Nana and the goddess Ninlil. His brother and sister are Iskar and Inanna. He rises in the mountains of the east and sets in the mountains of the west. He is usually depicted wearing a horned helmet and carrying a saw-edged weapon not unlike a pruning saw, which it is thought he has used to cut through the side of a mountain from which he emerges, symbolizing the dawn. He may also carry a mace and stand with one foot on the mountain. Utu's behavior is quite different from many other Mesopotamian gods, who are normally portrayed as being whimsical and acting based on their desires very much like mortals. Utu, on the other hand, is depicted as a heroic character whose actions are completely dictated by ethical considerations. It is due to this that Utu seldom appears in Mesopotamian myths. Before we leave the ancient Sumerian pantheon, there are a few more deities worthy of mention. Ansar and Kesar are mentioned in the Babylonian creation epic Enuma Elish as one of a pair of offspring of Lamu and Lahamu, and who in turn created Anu. Ansar is linked with heaven, while Kesar is identified with earth. Ki is the daughter of Ansar and Kesar and consort of An, according to some traditions. As the cosmos came into being, An took the role of god of heaven, and Ki became the personification of the earth and underworld. Ki is the mother of the god of the air Enlil, with whom she descended from the heavens. Some authorities argue that she was never regarded as a deity. There is no evidence of a cult, and the name appears in a limited number of Sumerian creation texts. So, as we can see from the previous list of deities, there are several gods who are more than 5,500 years old. Before we get to our best candidate for first known god in history, the archive believes it's important to address the Abrahamic God. Yahweh is the creator god of the southern tribes of Israel, headed by Levi and Benjamin. Possibly a copy of the Egyptian deity Atum, he was introduced by the pharaoh Amenhotep IV in the 15th century BC. He is the object of monolatrous but not necessarily monotheistic worship by the Hebrew settlers in Palestine. Yahweh is the God who was revealed to Moses on Mount Sinai and who provided the covenant and the 10 tablets of law. He is said to sit in judgment between 2 cherubim on the mercy seat, which rested above the focal point of Israelite worship, the Ark of the Covenant. The name Yahweh is an enigmatic no name. It survived into Christian religion, though it appears regularly only in the Jerusalem Bible. Elsewhere, in English translation, it is now generally replaced by the term Lord. Jehovah is a corruption introduced circa 1200 to 1300 AD. The Old Testament writings, particularly the Psalms, are littered with references indicating acceptance of many gods in the pantheon. Translators have substituted euphemisms such as saints and holy men. Although Yahweh is perceived in human form, he was not represented other than in romanticized Christian art. His presence is identified in Jewish tradition only by the empty space of the mercy seat. He is wholly transcendent, without physical needs, and according to Judeo-Christian tradition has no consort. This universal deity became known as Allah in Islamic tradition, which is even younger, with a known period of worship beginning circa 1200 BC. The God of the Bible is thousands of years younger than the deities already outlined. But do not waste your time trying to inform the Christians and Jews of the factual reality. The majority are not interested in this fact and prefer their own cognitive dissonance. Perhaps the best candidate for the first known god in history is Deities, often referred to as Deities Futur, which means Father Daylight Sky God. This is the reconstructed name of the proto-Indo-European sky god. The proto-Indo-Europeans were an ancient people that lived during the late Neolithic period circa 6400 BC to 3500 BC. They were located in the steppes north of the Black Sea and Caucasus Mountains, roughly modern-day Ukraine and southern Russia. Unfortunately, the Proto-Indo-Europeans were a pre-literate society, so they left no written records of their culture and way of life. However, based on indirect evidence, we know they possessed a religion, a distinct language, and mythology. Throughout millennia, the Indo-Europeans embarked on a series of migrations that led them to Europe, the Middle East, and as far south as India. Along these journeys, they carried with them their language and deities. Deities, in particular, acted as a template out of which most Indo-European cultures created their own gods and pantheons. There are many variations of Deities, some of which will sound quite familiar. The Greek Zeus, the Roman Jupiter, derived from Jus Pater. The Hindu gods were named Deva or Devi, and the Latin Deus is also a descendant of Deities. These are just a few examples of gods from seemingly disconnected areas of the world that nonetheless trace their lineage to a single divine figure, Deities. In addition to the historical background of Deities, what further insights do we have about this intriguing god? Unfortunately, the limited availability of written documentation hinders a thorough understanding of Deities, yet historians are assured of several key aspects. From atop the sky, Deities could see everything that happened in the world of mortals and was thus all-knowing and all-judging. For this reason, Deities may have also functioned as a god of justice, who punished the wicked and blessed the good. The sun may have been the eye of Deities. The wife of Deities may have been Degum, the Mother Earth goddess, and Deities was the father of the divine twins, Indo-European deities that served as rescuers and healers of mankind. As Indo-European religion progressed, forms of Deities, like Zeus, were given the title of King of Gods. However, in earlier times, Deities was simply the father of all gods. From Ireland to India, it is believed that all religious beliefs and forms of gods have come from the form of Deities. In fact, the Christian God figure and the concept of heaven are direct derivatives of Deities. When we trace the Indian roots of the god Deities, there are mentions of him as the paternal god of the sky in Vedic mythology. According to studies in Vedic mythology, the old god Deities was later succeeded by his son Indra as the sky god and the king of gods. In all the above religions, it is clear that Deities is the sky father. His transition into kingship for Roman and Greek religions is, however, not seen in the Vedic religion. In fact, the supreme book of hymns for Vedic religion, the Rig Veda, does not address any hymns directly to Deities. It has 6 hymns that are addressed to the Earth Mother and the Sky Father as a couple. The basis may be the same, but even at this very early point, we see division in how to worship these proto-gods. The Rig Veda might not have proclaimed Deities as the king of gods, but it has called Deities the all-knowing God. The transition of Deities as a king of gods comes from his existence as the all-encompassing vast sky. He is seen as the personification of heaven himself, and in many religions, heaven and the figure who resides there is the most important god. The form and appearance of gods have evolved, but at the root lies Deities. He came before all other gods, and he, essentially, is all other gods, for he is the idea of God. If ever there was a reductive concept of the word God, it can be applied to this figure. He is essentially humanity defining the focal point for what worship and religion should look like.